My name's Dombroski, and I'm a Rutherford Fellow working at Massey University in the area of human geography. Human geography is really about studying the relationships between people and place, or humans and nature, however you want to describe it. But I'm really interested in economics, economic geography, feminist economic geography, and looking at how the way we organise our economy affects the environment and how the environments that we live in also affect the economy. They're really not separate things at all.
Cool.
I did my undergraduate degree actually at Massey University. I did a BA in environmental studies, and then I did a master's in development studies, also at Massey University. And then I went overseas to do my PhD, started at the Australian National University and then moved to Western Sydney University during it and did a PhD in geography and got to work with some amazing international researchers as part of that experience, funded by the Australian government. I had 2 children during my PhD, and so the PhD process was also very, required a high level of management and skills in project management. So I actually found the transition from PhD to being a lecturer in my first job in Australia was great, because I had money and that makes lots of problems go away. But I think the transition I found difficult is my first job, my youngest child was only just turned 1 and I had to commute 2 hours across the city, and I had classes that started at 8 a.m. and that was very difficult in terms of managing childcare and managing a relationship with my then breastfeeding daughter, and just trying to keep a work-life balance between that long commute and the family at home. Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I think I did my study and my first job in Australia, and actually it was incredibly, I feel compared to New Zealand, it was incredibly privileged because I had paid parental leave during my scholarship for my PhD. So when I had a baby, I had 3 months paid leave, which was, not enough, but enough to, not starve, right? Because you can't really study when you've got this tiny being that you're having to look after. And then when I had my 3rd child, I was employed in Australian University, and I was actually only on fixed term contracts, but because I'd been employed on a series of fixed term contracts over more than whatever the limit was, a couple of years, I actually got 6 months full pay, even though my contract was terminating. So the 6 months full pay went past the end of my contract because they recognised that you couldn't find a new job when your contract finished in the middle of your parental leave. So that was amazing. And then last time you talked to me, I was pregnant with my 4th child, and I had that 4th child in the New Zealand system, and I had a horrible shock. The parental leave was capped at below minimum wage, and I'm the sole earner in my family that was about to welcome the 4th child into the family. It's not like my husband could just run out and get a job quickly just to cover my parental leave, and so I had 9 weeks of full pay from the university, and then I wasn't able to take up the government leave because I had a mortgage by that time and 3 other children who needed food and transport and all of the things that make a household work. So I had to go back to work at 9 weeks, and that was harder than my first transition into employment because I was, by that stage, had a lot of responsibility in the university, a lot of teaching responsibility. I had funded research projects on the go and deadlines to meet, milestones to meet. So that period was extremely, extremely difficult for me, and for my husband as well, who had to take this 9-week-old baby and basically bring him to me for all the feeds and manage all of that. So I had a very supportive department, and once I told them what was happening and kind of asked for help, my head of department recommended that I apply for sabbatical, and I had a book that was due during that time, and so I applied for sabbatical to work on that book, even though I'd only had some leave the previous year, and my head of school supported that. So I had a further sort of 4 months where I didn't have to teach, but I still had to work. And that really made such a difference. I've had colleagues, other parts of New Zealand, who've had to go straight back into teaching at 9 weeks. And you know, you're not even healed from the birth at that point, right? Yeah. So some things have changed. You know, New Zealand now has longer paid parental leave than when I had my 4th child, but it's still capped at below minimum wage. So that is an incredible barrier for women in particular, but also for men, because then men, you know, or fathers cannot take up, or even co-mothers, right, cannot take up that childcare role if they don't have access to leave that's reasonable, at a reasonable pay rate. Yeah, and that just perpetuates women have to care for children and men don't, rather than, you know, something more like the Scandinavian system where men are required to take up that parental leave or lose it. So we've still got a long way to go. That's right. And in fact, my husband wasn't entitled to any leave because he was a stay-at-home parent. So obviously, you know, there's no payments coming in for his work caring for the children. So a lot of people have it worse than me, but we still need to change it. Yeah, I think it's really important that a lot of researchers have been looking into, particularly in the case of parental leave, and women researchers in New Zealand. And there's a lot of really good research coming out at the moment showing the evidence for the effects of these policies. And so I think that's progress, and I think that's really important. Some universities have tried to say, well, we need to have more metrics, and then we can measure exactly how much women have contributed, and then we can have fairer policies. But I don't actually think that that's the way the way to do it. But one of the most positive things I've seen, and the reason I was able to get a Rutherford Fellowship, in fact, is the Rutherford Fellowship and other Royal Society Fellowships have made a declaration, I guess, that as for every child that you have, you get 2 years added to your early career research status. So for me, I finished my PhD in 2013, and I got the Rutherford in 2021. It was the last year of my early career researcher status. But because I have quite a few children, actually, I could keep going for quite some time. But that 2-year period is just recognition that even if you're working full time, even if you went back to work at 9 weeks, your I don't know if your productivity in those metrics has been affected, because you might be up all night breastfeeding, turning up in the morning, delivering your classes. I believe I still performed at my highest sort of quality level, but the time I can't stay up into the night writing a paper. I can't work in the weekends. I can't do those things that many academics use that extra time to stay, to kind of get ahead. And that Rutherford Fellowship is recognising you know, potential leaders in the research community. And I think if they hadn't had that recognition, for many people it might exclude them from that. That comes to mind is the parental leave, and I support the unions in New Zealand, but I do think the unions in Australia really pushed for that parental leave, 6 months paid parental leave for all staff, not just permanent staff, all staff who had been on fixed term contracts inclusive. And I think that would make an incredible difference to families in Aotearoa, New Zealand. That would, you know, give you space to recover from birth, you know, attach to your baby, feed them if you're able to breastfeed them till 6 months and before the solids are introduced, and then you've got that ability to hand them over to someone else to care for them once they're not so reliant on one person. And I think that's a fair amount. And given all the extra work that we put into our jobs, I think we're kind of entitled to that support, actually. Most people still work. The paper we published on parental leave, most people still work during their parental leave, but what it does is it removes the pressure to have to answer emails, to have to turn up for class, and gives you the space to organise your life around a new family member. So that's the first thing, I think. And then the other thing I think is the is the resourcing for workloads. You know, we're increasingly having more and more tasks to do with less and less staff in many departments, and that with COVID, you know, the work people put into transitioning courses online and looking after students who are in distress, that work was above and beyond what we would normally have to do. And I think what we're seeing now is people are burnt out from 2 years of doing that and feeling like we need more resourcing from the government, we need more resourcing from our universities to support people to pull back, to take a breath, to, you know, recharge, and to not constantly feel like they have to be working, you know, 10-hour days just to keep on top of things. Yeah, those are my two things. I'm researching caring economies. So my Rutherford project is titled Transitioning to Caring Economies Through Transformative Community Investment, and I'm looking at the work that communities are already doing to transition us to a different form of economy that cares for humans and cares for the environment, and that work is folded into some work I've done with the National Science Challenges, the Building Better Homes, Towns and Cities, working with Amanda Yates, looking at how do we design for urban places that enhance Māori. So it's a Māori Order project, and those are the two things I'm spending my time on at the moment.